My name is Ashley Elliott, and my story more often than not coincides with addiction. I am a recovering heroin addict. I've been clean since December 28th, 2012. Since I've gotten clean, I've decided to take a path to help others whenever they're struggling. I know for me, when I felt hopeless, if it wasn't for the women in my life that had lifted me up, I don't think I would have made it. So my goal is to help those find hope that think there's no hope. In my darkest days, I would say I probably had no idea what was going on at any given time. I went from being an all-honor student in my freshman and sophomore year of high school, straight A's, to, slowly decreasing my workload. I was a merit student my junior year, and by the time I was a senior, I was a general student. Luckily enough, I still graduated with a merit diploma. But that was the start of the dark days. That really just kind of involved drinking, experimenting with a few different substances, nothing too extreme. But probably by the time I had graduated high school, I would consider pretty deep into my addiction. Not my rock bottom, but still pretty deep. And what would happen over the next 12 years would be me finding heroin, falling in love. I always made the joke that heroin was my first love. It never failed me, it never let me down. Every time I wanted it to do something, change the way I felt, it did just that. So after that point, it was really weird. I went from using to needing, and I don't remember it. I always say that, like, I don't remember when I went from like recreational use to addiction, to dependency on it. I would go through several different treatment centers, methadone centers. I tried Suboxone. I tried moving to California. I thought if I just packed my bags and leave and go somewhere else where nobody knew me, I could just start over and be whoever I wanted to be. But the problem with that is wherever you go, there you are. So at that time I didn't realize the problem was me. I thought it was the drugs. I was in two very abusive relationships. The first one, we were living in Nevada, and he'd ended up headbutting me and breaking my nose in the front lawn of our house. Shortly after that, I had ended up running into an old friend out in California. She saw me. I think I'd probably been about 140 pounds at that time. My collarbones were sticking out, and I was rather frail. So she bought me a plane ticket, and 3 days later I came home. And when I came home, I just got involved with the same people. And when I did that, that is when the legal stuff started happening. The first time I had ever gotten in trouble, I had actually lived right up the street. The apartment that I was living in had got raided, and that was the first time I had been arrested. After that point, it was just one after another getting arrested. Eventually I kind of tried to do it on my own. Got involved with another boyfriend who was rather abusive. Fast forward, my first treatment center, I decided to leave AMA, which is against medical advice. My thought process was I was going to leave, come home, use, go to court, and go to jail. And I was okay with that. I thought that was a solid plan. And to me, that's how crazy the disease of addiction is. I did that. I left. I came home. I used. I went to court, and the judge said finish rehab, which was not a part of my plan. And over the next 2 months, I had to wait 40 days because I left AMA, and then I had to wait another 30 days for a bed to open up. And within those 2 months, the apartment I was living in had burned down. under the influence. I had fallen asleep on my hand for an extended period of time, which caused something called Saturday night palsy. It's where an addict or an alcoholic passes out on an extremity and does nerve damage. I had no use of my hand for over 3 months. I was an IV user, and there was a point in time where a needle had broken off into my arm, and I left it there for 6 years until I'd gotten clean and got a straight head on, and I had surgery to have that removed. My kidney functions are extremely low. The way they explain it to me is my kidneys function as that of a 70-year-old. And they think that's due to all of the different opiates and the wear and tear on the body. I think a big part of the health effects that people is the emotional state that one is in while in addiction. I'm a very outgoing person. I can talk to just about anyone, anywhere, about anything. When I was using, I was afraid to leave my house. I'd lived less than 200 or 300 yards from a grocery store, and it took everything inside of me to get up, get myself dressed, and go to the grocery store just because my anxiety levels were so high. You know, a lot of people use to try and escape those feelings of depression or anxiety. In reality, the only thing it does is increase those. So I was going through panic attacks, a lot of the different medications I was on. I was having medicated-induced seizures. I think I felt like my body just couldn't go anymore. Like my sister pointed it out the most. Like, the way that my family always knew I was using was how much I weighed, because I would go through periods of extreme weight loss, you know, while using, and then gaining that back, you know, when you attempt to get clean. So the health effects had, lasting effects, psychologically, physically, emotionally. It takes a long time to heal all of that stuff, to accept it and deal with it and move forward with it. I do honestly say that without my sponsorship family, I don't think I would still be clean today. So when I went into treatment, the first thing I told my counselor was, I'm going to tell you I want to go home, and not to don't let me go home. Which she didn't, and she relocated me to a halfway house down in Frederick, Maryland. And while you're in treatment, it's basically almost like a brainwash. And I always say, if I needed to be brainwashed to get away from whatever I was doing before, I was totally okay with that. But I really got involved in a 12-step program. It took me about 6 months after I was really involved in the program to be clean. And the reason that is, like I said before, my clean date's December 28th, 2012. So this was the first year I was down in Frederick. It was my first Christmas. I remember I was getting ready to come home, and my sponsor and I had come up with this plan to where I stay at my sister's. She's my safe zone. No contact with old friends or exes. I didn't do anything she suggested. When I went home, I think the first thing I did was contact my ex. He brought my dog over. My sister's kids were sick, so I ended up staying at my parents', which is not my safe zone. And I ended up using. So I'd used all over Christmas. And it was December 27th, and my best friend and my sponsorship family had called me to wish me a Merry Christmas. And I thought what we had was just a normal conversation. And when I got off the phone, probably less than 5 minutes later, my sponsor called me. And she kind of walked me through my thought process. As in, I had my dog, which meant I saw my ex. I was at my parents', which is not a good place for me. You know, she was trying to get me to realize all of the decisions I was making weren't necessarily the best ones. So the last thing she said to me was, she worked night shift as a security guard at a prison. And she said, I don't have to work tonight. I don't know if you want to white knuckle your way through this situation, but if you don't, I'll come and get you. And I was kind of just like, okay, you know, I'll think about it, I'll call you back. And when I hung up the phone, it was like, at that moment that I realized that these people that I barely knew, 6 months, really wanted nothing but the best for me. And I think that was my reality check. So I ended up calling her back and I said, come get me. So my sponsor and my best friend drove 3.5 hours from Frederick up to Garrett County in the middle of a snowstorm to pick me up and take me back home. That's why I consider the 28th my clean date, because that was the following day. And since then I haven't used, or I don't drink, I pretty much don't do anything. Throughout my early recovery, my first year or two, I remember a period where it was around my first year clean, and they say in the 12-step program that at your anniversaries you start going crazy. And that's what I was experiencing. It was around my first year. I had no idea why, but I just wanted to mess things up. You know, I knew I couldn't quit my job because I needed my job. I liked my friends, so I didn't want to screw anything up with them. I just couldn't come up with anything to ruin, but that's all I was thinking about, because as an addict, a lot of the times my first thought is self-destruction, especially when I can't deal with feelings, whether they be good or bad. So I remember texting both my sponsor and my best friend and telling them that everything I was doing was reminding me of using. And my best friend sent me this long message of all of the things she knew about me through my active addiction, including, you know, the abusive exes and going to jail and all of that stuff. And then she sent me another message of everything that we had done in recovery. And I always say in the first year of recovery, I lived more than I did in those 12 years of using. Even though I went all over the place, California, Nevada, I still didn't really experience anything because I was never present in the moment. So when she sent that to me, she followed it up with, think about those two and then tell me if you still want to use. So I was living with my sponsor at the time. I'd gotten home and she told me to get dressed. And I didn't know why. She didn't tell me. She just told me to get dressed. So I got dressed. My grand sponsor, which was her sponsor, showed up and they took me to a baseball game and made me sit there. And I sat at this baseball game and I cried. I cried and I cried and I cried. And my grand sponsor's theory was always, when you don't know what to do, sit on your hands. And that's what I did. I just had to sit through it, and here I am at the Frederick Keys baseball game. Everyone's having a heyday, and I'm bawling because honestly, I don't know why. But situations like that, like if they weren't there for me in those moments, if I would have allowed my own thought process to continue, I eventually would have came up with the idea of the best solution right now is to go use. So I strongly agree that a social support, emotional support is a key component of recovery. We can't do it alone, and it's a lot easier when you have people who understand what you've been through. I know for me, sometimes it's tough with my health issues trying to talk to a doctor and being taken seriously, because I'm a recovering addict, and once they hear that word, human being goes out the window. So it's definitely tough, and you know, sometimes you gotta have thick skin, you know, because there are some pretty mean people out there that have a very closed mind and aren't very understanding. I kind of just smile and nod at those people. It's been 6 years since I entered my first treatment center, and in 2 days I'll graduate from college. And that's crazy to me to think of where I was. I remember when I went to MedX to speak on a panel session, standing outside and seeing the big sign that said Stanford University, and I just thought to myself, how did I get here? What I didn't understand. It's so weird. And I do attribute it, a lot of this, to Regina. You know, if Regina hadn't brought me to Cinderblocks, if she wouldn't have asked me to share my story, all of these other people wouldn't have heard it, and I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I've had over the past year. I remember when I told my family what was wrong with me, by what was wrong with me being addicted to drugs at that time. And it was suggested to me by my counselor at the treatment center I was at. It was an outpatient methadone treatment center. So I gathered my family together. Granted, again, my family's well known in the community. My brother has been at the Department of Juvenile Justice for over 20 years. He's the Cub Scout leader. You know, everybody knows my brother. Both of my sisters, the one's a teacher, elementary school teacher, and the other one is a guidance counselor secretary. So you could definitely say I was the black sheep of the family. And I remember when I told them, they didn't understand because they didn't know. They didn't know anything about it. And I feel like if people were more educated about addiction and what causes it and the interactions and, you know, the pharmacology between the different substances and how they affect the brain, and you know, just stepping outside, you know, of their shoes and trying to look at it from a different perspective, I think would have a huge impact on things. I feel like a lot of people feel shame and guilt because of their addiction, and are embarrassed to talk about it because one of the doctors on the panel at MedX said it best. You know, for years, addicts have been lepers, you know, and that's what we are. We, you know, once you have that label, there's no turning back. And again, when people don't have that open mind to have the empathy or compassion to understand, you don't get anywhere, you know. It's a fruitless battle. So I definitely feel like education, knowledge, understanding, simple human being, decency. Nobody deserves to die, you know, no matter what they choose to do or chose to do. And I hear that a lot. You know, they chose to use, so they deserve to die. And I can speak from experience that there were many times I used against my own will. Like, I didn't want to be doing what I was doing, but I knew physically I couldn't go on without it because I was dependent on it. You know, in our 12-step program, we say drugs aren't the issue. Drugs are a side effect of addiction. And our real problem is the way that we think and the way that we feel, and not being able to cope with those things. So it's exhausting and it's long, and it does take a lot of motivation. I would say self-will, but that's really nothing at all what it has to do with. Whenever I was using in this small town, I had no idea about resources because it wasn't something people talked about. You know, I remember going to treatment and going to my first 12-step program, and they're like, "You've never been to a meeting before?" And I had no idea what a meeting was because I didn't have the resources here. So the more we talk, the more we bring it out, the more we bring it up. You know, I think the quicker we can get past the stigma of it and past the negativity of addiction and see it simply as what it is, and that's a disease, you know. Much like a diabetic who takes their insulin every day, an addict, you know, we get a daily reprieve by simply choosing not to use. And more often than not, the addict that chooses not to use is a miracle, you know, because everything in my being says use, use, use. And every day that I choose not to do that is a miracle, and nothing short of that.